This week on The Watchman, he's America's top official in Israel and the first ever U.S. ambassador to serve at the United States Embassy in Jerusalem. David Friedman joins us to share the inside story of Israel's historic recent peace deals and the Trump administration's tough stand against Iran and the Palestinian Authority.
Moving the embassy to Jerusalem, why was that important? Because it showed the world, not just Israel, but it showed the Arab nations as well, that the president can be trusted to keep a promise that the United States will stand with its allies and will not shy away from threats from its enemies.
Plus, we head to Jordan's Mount Nebo, the legendary site where God showed Moses the Holy Land, as we retrace the steps of one of the Bible's greatest prophets. It's all this week, only right here on The Watchman. And welcome to The Watchman. We are witnessing the birth of a new Middle East. Just a few years ago, peace deals between Israel and the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain would have been unthinkable. But today, several Sunni Arab nations are in line to make peace with the Jewish state. Even Saudi Arabia could soon come to the table. The Trump administration strategy in the region has worked. The president and his team have held the Iranian regime and the Palestinians accountable for their destructive behavior. At the same time, they've stressed the great economic benefits for Arab countries that normalize relations with Israel. This strategy has been a game changer in the world's most pivotal region. And now, the Iranian regime, Turkey, and other anti-Israel and anti-Western forces like Hezbollah are increasingly isolated. Ambassador David Friedman has had a front row seat for all of these earth-shaking developments. He's the first ambassador to serve at the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem, and he presided over its historic opening in May 2018. He joined us recently from Jerusalem to share the inside story on the new Middle East and what comes next. Take a look. Ambassador Friedman, thanks so much for joining us. It's always great to have you.
Eric, hi. Great to see you, and virtually, but great to see you anyway, and great to be here.
First, let's start with the Abraham Accords. A lot of Americans are saying, hey, this is a great thing, peace between Israel and its Arab neighbors. But what exactly do the Abraham Accords entail, and why are they so important?
Well, the Abraham Accords, the name itself, right, is it's named after Abraham, who was the father of many nations, including the Jewish nation and the Arab nation. And as we begin our Torah reading cycle now, we're just about ready to read about the rivalry between Abraham's two sons, Isaac and Ishmael. Isaac was the one from whom the Jewish nation descended, and the Arab nation came from Ishmael. And they had quite a rivalry for many years. But what we do know that Isaac and Ishmael reconciled. We know that in the book of Genesis, that they reconciled and they buried their father in the cave of Machpelah. They buried Abraham there. And so that was the original reconciliation of Jews and Arabs. And now, about 3,500 years later, the Bible is now coming back to life and repeating itself. And we're seeing both nations reconcile. Now, why is this important? Because there's 22 nations in the Arab League that, since Israel came into existence, with the exceptions of Jordan and Egypt, they didn't recognize Israel's right to exist. They reflexively were against everything that Israel was in favor of. And now we've completely broken that mold, broken that paradigm. We have two really important countries, the UAE and Bahrain, agreeing to make peace with Israel, to normalize with Israel. You have a real warmth, not just a government-to-government peace, but you see beginning to develop among the people a real sense of warmth, of mutual appreciation, of recognition, of love, of a desire to get to know each other better. I think when history recalls these events, they will recall that it all began with trust, and it began with leadership. The ability of both Israel and the Arab nations to trust the president. And if I may, the very first act of trust may not be obvious to everyone, but moving the embassy to Jerusalem. Why was that important? Because it showed the world, not just Israel, but it showed the Arab nations as well, that the president can be trusted to keep a promise that the United States will stand with its allies and will not shy away from threats from its enemies. That move of the embassy made that point loud and clear, and believe me, everyone took notice. And that began a level of trust and discussions where I think we got to this point, and we're going to get further.
The Trump administration has been very tough on Iran, increasing sanctions, taking out the terror master Qasem Soleimani. Could you tell us more about the Trump administration's approach to Iran and why it has been a major game changer in the region?
Well, look, I think we have, as you know, we have shifted the American approach to Iran by 180 degrees. Instead of providing them with cash, providing them with a pathway to a nuclear weapon, and making no demands at all on Iran to end their malign activity in Syria or Lebanon or Yemen or Iraq, to make no demands upon them to end their acquisition of ballistic missiles. We turned that completely around, and we put on a maximum pressure campaign that has already, certainly not a full success yet, but has already begun to bear fruit. We see Iran beginning to pull back from some of their malign activity because they're just running out of money. And if we can keep the pressure on, we will get Iran, I believe, back to a place where they can join the community of nations in peace. We're not there yet, but we're on the right track. Now, if that all goes away, I'll be very, very disappointed, and I shudder to think where that will lead. That was certainly a factor in Israel making peace with nations in the Gulf and the region. Common enemies do have that effect. But when you look at the people-to-people engagement that's already begun, you know, the warmth, the embracing of one people of another, you can tell it's more than just a common enemy. There really is great opportunity here.
Ambassador, another thing that has struck me the past few years with the Trump administration is that you actually hold the Palestinian Authority of Mahmoud Abbas accountable. Tell us why that is so important.
Look, we have to hold the Palestinians accountable because we owe that to the Palestinian people. The Palestinian leadership has betrayed their people. It's painful to say, but you know, we've given the Palestinians billions and billions of dollars, more money than any other nation by far. A lot of that money went to the wrong place. There's a lot of corruption there. There's no respect for human rights. They continue to pay terrorists. They continue to incite terror and to incite hatred. That's a pathway to nowhere. And that has to stop, and we have to hold the Palestinian leadership accountable. We owe that to the people. And what you see now is, I think that message is resonating throughout the region.
Ambassador, as we wrap up here, could you tell us a bit about how it's been working at the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem since May 2018? History made, of course. You're the very first ambassador to serve at that U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem. What has this meant to you personally, and what's it like being in this historic building in these historic times?
It's been incredible. It's been the honor of my life to serve our nation from a Jerusalem embassy. Before the COVID epidemic, we had buses pulling up one by one of American tourists, Asian tourists, people throughout the world, and they would get out of the car and one by one they would take a picture by the dedication plaque of the embassy in Jerusalem. We have created a shrine, and I don't say that from a point of pride, but from a point of great gratification that this move of the embassy to Jerusalem has been embraced by so many people throughout the world, not just Americans, and of course Americans by and large approve of this by enormous proportions, but everywhere. People from Asia, people from Africa, they come to the embassy not to get a visa or a passport, but just to stand by the opening and take a picture and to thank God that we were able to reach this incredible moment in time.
Thanks again to Ambassador Friedman for taking time out of his very busy schedule to join us. Well, coming up after the break, now that Israel has made peace with the UAE and Bahrain, what exactly does that peace look like? we head to the largest hospital in all of Israel to learn more. Stick around.
QAEDA's mission is to educate and empower millions of American Christians to speak with one voice in defense of Israel and the Jewish people. There's several ways you can learn more about Israel every day through QAEDA's dynamic resources. The QAEDA Coffee Break is a weekly bite-sized Israel lesson delivered to your email inbox. Dive into topics like the forgotten Jewish refugees, Israel's agricultural communities called kibbutzim, and the Hamas rocket threat, with options to dig deeper each week. Every lesson can be read in under 5 minutes while you're making a cup of coffee. Plus, stay informed on all the latest news out of Israel and how it affects you by subscribing to QAEDA's Daily Briefing. It's a daily news roundup of important Israel-related headlines, so you're always up to date when it comes to Israel. Follow QAEDA on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram for daily content, including videos, news articles, breaking news, devotionals, fun facts, and more.
And welcome back. It didn't take long for the peace deal between Israel and the United Arab Emirates to bear fruit. Israel's Sheba Medical Center, which is the largest medical center in the entire Middle East, recently reached an agreement with a leading UAE firm called Apex that promises to open some very exciting new doors between the two countries. We were joined by the director of Sheba's international division to learn more. Yoel, thanks so much for joining us. You just returned from the United Arab Emirates, a very exciting trip. Sheba Medical Center, striking a very important deal with Apex Investment Group. Tell us more about it and what this deal entails.
The agreement is talking about, and we already started to activate this agreement, mainly is focusing on what the best of the Israeli medical Western can bring to the Emirates, and focusing in some areas like the ARC and the innovation that you know already about the medical innovation scene that happening here at Sheba. So they are very keen to learn more and to investigate, but also focusing in medical education and medical simulation and fighting against COVID-19. And very interesting at the end, I want to mention that they are also very keen to learn about our, I will say, global humanitarian efforts, because they also are dealing with the humanitarian efforts in Africa. So they think that we can join hands and join forces to support other countries in need.
Tell us a little bit more in terms of what the deal looks like. Will citizens from the UAE be able to travel to Sheba Medical Center for treatment, number one? And number two, I think it bears mentioning, Yoel, that Sheba Medical Center was the first medical center in Israel to forge an agreement like this with the UAE in the wake of the Abraham Accords.
Absolutely, Eric. And yes, they are very anxious and keen to come to Israel. And part of the agreement is to allow them very, very soon, Eric, as soon as the commercial flights will beginning at the beginning of next year. We will see here people from the Emirates that coming to take their medical treatment. It's close, it's cheaper, and you have to understand, and you know it because you visited Sheba, the atmosphere at Sheba allows all nations, all religious, especially from our cousins from the Abraham side, to get here the best treatment that we can offer them in an atmosphere that surrounding them with, we will say, cozy atmosphere. Countries in the area are looking upon the Emirates and try to imitate and will imitate them very, very soon. And, some of the countries are known as Bahrain, and very soon I will go personally to Bahrain, and then the other Emirates and the Gulf countries will follow up, and even Saudi Arabia are sitting on the fence, and they are measuring with baby steps, but good news are coming in the future.
Yeah, well, it's just a great thing to see, and as you mentioned, more is very likely on the way, and we know that Sheba Medical Center will be at the forefront of all of it. You're in a very exciting position right now, Yoel. Keep up the great work. It's always great having you. We'll see you again soon. Coming up, we head to Jordan, a nation which Israel has been at peace with since 1994, to get an up-close look at the very place where God showed Moses the promised land. And we're joined there by the one and only Danny the Digger Herman. Folks, you will not want to miss this. Don't move.
Traveling to Israel, the land of the Bible, is a once-in-a-lifetime experience that will revolutionize your life. This month, we're bringing Israel to you with Kufai's new Promised Land mini-book. While you may not have had the opportunity to physically step foot in this sacred land, we want you to discover Israel for yourself in a powerful way. Kufai's Promised Land booklet will bring the Holy Land to life and transform you. And this month, it's yours with your gift of any amount. On every page, you'll visit important biblical and historical sites within Israel that will transport you to the land of the Bible. Learn the historical and present-day significance of major sites in Israel, from the Sea of Galilee to Jerusalem. See the scriptures unfold before your very eyes as you follow in the footsteps of our Redeemer. Visit www.kufai.org/promisedland and receive your copy today.
Danny, what a view we have right now. We are standing atop Mount Nebo. This was part of the Holy Land, but we're not in the land that you and I are usually in, the land of Israel. We are in Jordan right now.
The Hashemite kingdom of Jordan. In biblical times, this is presumably the very place where Moses saw the promised land, or most of it, but the Jordan River will be an obstacle he will not overcome. He will die before crossing over the Jordan River, will be buried somewhere on Mount Nebo. The Bible says that it doesn't know its exact location, and Joshua will take over.
Wow.
Joshua will make sure everyone is circumcised, and then they will cross over, will battle the city of Jericho. You can see it vaguely there on the other side of the valley, and will eventually take and settle in the promised land.
Now, Danny, set the scene for us a bit more. Number one, again, an absolutely breathtaking view. God doesn't make mistakes. You can see why he brought Moses here to this vantage point to show him the promised land. Set the scene. Okay, we're here on Mount Nebo in Jordan, but as you mentioned, Jericho. What else can we see over the horizon on a clear day here in Jordan?
First of all, at the lowest part of this valley, the Jordan meanders its way into the Dead Sea, right under the sun. On a clear day, you can see the towers over Mount Scopus and Mount of Olives.
So you can see Jerusalem from here on a clear day.
Yes, you can see the holy city of Jerusalem also from here quite well. Bethlehem you can see, okay?
Bethlehem.
And the Judean desert, the Samaria, eastern mountains, they're all very visible from here. The land of milk and honey is just around the corner.
And it was so close to Moses, he could almost touch it, yet he was not permitted, the Bible says, to enter the land, Danny. Now, some believe Moses was actually buried, Danny, in the valley below us, if I'm not mistaken, right?
The text is a bit vague. It mentions a mountaintop and then it mentions a valley, and it concludes with the statement that the tomb location is really just unknown. And maybe that's done deliberate because in Judaism, the desire is to worship only God and only in one place up in Jerusalem. The tomb of Moses should not be any focal point of veneration.
Right.
So the text says its location is unknown. Joshua now takes over. They will cross over the Jordan River.
The Israelites cross over.
Where they will inherit the promised land. Now, centuries later, in the same area, John the Baptist will start preaching for the end of days that are coming soon, and will start baptizing people in the water of the Jordan River. Tradition says it also happened here. In fact, tradition says
on the Jordanian side.
Yes, it says on Bethany beyond the Jordan, but in the same location, argues the tradition, where Joshua crossed over.
Wow.
The site becomes holy for both events, and even Elijah squeezes into that area. It is said that Elijah went up to the heavens also from the Jordan River, or over the Jordan River.
All on the Jordanian side. Danny, this is fascinating. I think a lot of people watching at home, they might not know this history that took place in Jordan. I personally did not realize that Elijah ascended to heaven on a chariot on the Jordanian side of the Jordan River. This is fascinating.
Crossed over and then he went up, indeed.
And he went up. And he was also perhaps born on this side, Elijah the Tishbite.
Elijah, the Tishbites came from the Gilad Mountains, which should be in the northern area. This is the beginning of the Moabite land. Beyond us is the land of the Edomites, later the land of the Nabateans. Petra is also in Jordan, a spectacular place.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Moabites. I think of Ruth, obviously, the story of Ruth and Naomi. Ruth, a Moabite.
Yes, David is a quarter of a Moabite.
Right.
And Bethlehem, where he came from, is right under the sun. Unfortunately, it's too cloudy today, but that's also visible from here.
Now, we mentioned John the Baptist. Much of his ministry in baptizing Danny on this side of the Jordan River. Again, it's almost like Jordan is an extension of the Holy Land.
It's part of it. In historical periods, it was part of it. Both in the Iron Age, it was the lots of the Israelites. Reuben and Gad were here.
So 2 of the tribes, of the 12 tribes, were here on the Jordanian side.
Indeed. Then in Roman times, in Maccabean times, it's also part of it. Herod had one of his fortresses, the site of Makawir, or Machaerus, here on the Jordanian side of the valley. And even in the Middle Ages, the Crusaders also ruled part of this side in Shubak and Karak.
Yes. Wow. So the roots run deep here. There's also a Byzantine era presence here I want to discuss with you in a second, Danny. But first, John the Baptist, a key figure here in Jordanian Christian history in particular. Look, Jesus was baptized again on this side of the Jordan River. I think that'll shock a lot of people to know that.
Yes, most people go and visit the baptism site next to Jericho.
On the Israeli side,
but
yes.
The text says it was at Bethany beyond the Jordan. And when you really go there, you see that it makes more sense that that would be the place where John is active, because there are like places to live in. On the western Israeli side, it's just a barren landscape.
And by the way, people might be shocked, but there was quite a Jewish presence 2,000 years ago here in Jordan. I think of John the Baptist again, Danny, not far from here. He was imprisoned and beheaded at a fortress here in Jordan.
Kol Machaerus, there was also a Jewish colony in a site called today in Arabic Arak el-Amir. And this site is just filled with such rich and diverse history.
It truly is biblical history. Now, you and I were talking before the show, Danny, we should see the tour buses rolling up here all over Jordan, because as a Christian, much of my faith, a lot of the key events unfolded right here on the Jordanian side of the Jordan River.
Definitely. For a Christian, the baptism site, the tomb of Moses, or Mount Nebo, and where John the Baptist were beheaded, I think they are a must for every Christian pilgrim coming to the Holy Land. This is part of the Holy Land.
As Israel normalizes relations with its Arab neighbors, some are asking whether this is the false peace talked about in the book of Revelation. Folks, this is not that. That day has not yet come in the prophetic timeline. As for the recent deals, you can tell a lot about them by who is opposing them. The loudest voices slamming the Abraham Accords were the Iranian regime, Turkey, Hamas, and Hezbollah. That should tell you something. The bad actors like Iran know these deals leave them further isolated and cut off from the prosperity that will come to the Middle East as nations like the UAE and Bahrain continue to accept Israel's right to exist. Because, folks, Israel isn't going anywhere. We talk a lot here about the power of Genesis 12:3, and rightfully so. But sometimes the second part of that verse is overlooked when God tells Abraham that through Israel, all nations on earth shall be blessed. That's exactly what's happening right now. Hey, be sure to visit cufi.org and join the movement here at Christians United for Israel. And also subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on social media for exclusive content that you won't see anywhere else. Thanks for joining us this week on The Watchman. Until next time, God bless you. And remember, never hold your peace.